Today, millions of people know Ed Sheeran as one of the biggest music stars on the planet. His songs have filled stadiums, broken records, and reached audiences in every corner of the world. But what most people don't realize is that his story almost ended before it ever began. Long before the sold-out tours, before the awards, before the billions of streams, there was a young boy who seemed completely out of place in an industry obsessed with image. He wasn't the obvious choice. He didn't fit the mold. He didn't have the appearance, the connections, or the instant charisma that record labels were searching for. In fact, many people looked at him and saw someone who would never make it. And yet somehow, that same boy would go on to accomplish something extraordinary. But this isn't just a story about becoming famous. It's a story about rejection. The kind of rejection that arrives quietly at first. A missed opportunity, a dismissive comment, a door that never opens. Then another, and another, until most people begin to wonder if the dream itself was a mistake. What makes this story remarkable is not that Ed Sheeran faced rejection. Thousands of aspiring musicians do every year. What makes it remarkable is what happened next. Because while others were waiting for someone to discover them, Ed was building something in the shadows. While others were searching for shortcuts, he was making decisions that almost nobody noticed at the time. Decisions that seemed insignificant in the moment, but would eventually change the course of his entire life. The world would later call it success. But success wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the result of years spent fighting battles that nobody saw. And as you'll discover, the biggest obstacle standing between Ed Sheeran and global stardom wasn't a lack of talent, money, or opportunity. It was the constant pressure to believe what everyone else seemed to believe about him, that he would never make it. So how did a young musician that few people took seriously become one of the most recognizable artists on earth? The answer begins long before the fame, long before the records, and long before the world knew his name. If you had met Ed Sheeran as a child, there is a good chance you would never have predicted what was coming. Nothing about him seemed to match the image of a future global superstar. He grew up in Framlingham, a quiet market town in Suffolk, England, far removed from the entertainment capitals where music careers were often born. There were no celebrity connections waiting to open doors, no powerful mentors preparing him for the spotlight, no signs that the world would one day chant his name in sold-out stadiums. In fact, his earliest years were marked by challenges that made standing out feel almost impossible. As a child, Ed struggled with a speech impediment. Speaking confidently did not come naturally to him. Social situations could feel uncomfortable. Conversations often carried an invisible layer of anxiety. While some children effortlessly captured attention, Ed frequently found himself observing from the sidelines. Then there was his appearance. Years later, millions would recognize his bright red hair as part of his identity. But childhood can be unforgiving toward anything perceived as different. Being different often made him an easy target. The traits that would eventually make him memorable were the same traits that sometimes made him feel isolated. Most people imagine successful artists beginning their lives with obvious signs of greatness. The reality is often much less dramatic. For Ed, music wasn't initially a path to fame. It was something else entirely. It became a refuge, a place where the insecurities that followed him through daily life seemed to lose their power. When he picked up a guitar, something changed. Not overnight, not in some magical transformation, but gradually he discovered a form of expression that didn't depend on perfect appearances or flawless conversations. Music allowed him to communicate what words often could not. And yet, even then, there was no guarantee this passion would lead anywhere. Thousands of young people learn instruments, thousands write songs, thousands dream about performing on stages. Very few build careers from it. What made Ed different wasn't talent alone. At that stage, nobody could have predicted how far his abilities would take him. The real difference was something far less visible, an unusual willingness to keep going despite discomfort, to keep practicing when progress felt slow, to keep showing up when confidence was low, to keep investing time in something that offered no immediate rewards. Most people never notice the early foundations of success because they appear ordinary. A few extra hours of practice, a few difficult conversations, a few moments of persistence, but those small decisions were quietly shaping the person Ed would become. Years later, audiences would see the confidence. What they wouldn't see were the countless moments when confidence didn't exist and action happened anyway. And that hidden pattern was already beginning to emerge. The world had not rejected him yet. That part was still coming. But the conditions that would allow him to survive those future rejections were already being built in silence. The question was whether those foundations would be strong enough when reality finally tested them. Most people think rejection arrives as a single moment. One conversation, one failure, one devastating no. But for Ed Sheeran, rejection wasn't an event. It became an environment. As he moved deeper into music, he began encountering a reality that countless aspiring artists discover sooner or later. Talent alone wasn't enough. Passion wasn't enough. Hard work wasn't enough. The music industry was filled with people chasing the same dream, and most of them would never reach it. At first, the setbacks seemed manageable, a performance that attracted little attention, a demo that went unanswered, a room full of people who barely looked up from their drinks while he played. None of these experiences were catastrophic on their own. The problem was repetition. When disappointment happens once, it feels temporary. When it happens repeatedly, it begins to feel like evidence. Evidence that maybe everyone else sees something you don't. Evidence that perhaps the dream is unrealistic. Evidence that you're investing years into a future that doesn't exist. This is where many careers quietly end, not because people lose ability, not because they stop caring, but because constant rejection slowly changes the story they tell themselves. Every ignored email becomes a message. Every closed door becomes a verdict. Every missed opportunity becomes proof. And the most dangerous part is that these conclusions often feel rational. By his late teens, Ed was already seeing how difficult the road ahead would be. The artists receiving attention often seemed more polished, more connected, more marketable. They looked like the kind of people record labels wanted to put on magazine covers. Ed didn't, and he knew it. There were moments when industry expectations felt almost impossible to overcome. He wasn't the stereotypical pop star. He wasn't the obvious commercial product. In a business built on first impressions often worked against him. But something unusual happened. Instead of treating rejection as a signal to stop, he started treating it as information. Every failure revealed a weakness. Every setback exposed a gap. Every disappointment taught him something about the game he was trying to enter. While others interpreted rejection emotionally, Ed increasingly studied it strategically. Why didn't that performance connect? Why wasn't that song working? Why weren't people paying attention? These questions became more valuable than the rejection itself. Slowly, his mindset began separating from the crowd. Many aspiring musicians were focused on being accepted. Ed was becoming obsessed with improving. That distinction would change everything. Because acceptance depends on other people, improvement does not. Yet even with this mentality, the challenges kept coming. The industry still wasn't interested. The opportunities still weren't appearing. The audience he dreamed of reaching still barely existed. And perhaps most difficult of all, there was no guarantee that any of his sacrifices would ever pay off. Imagine dedicating years to a goal while receiving almost no external proof that you're moving in the right direction. That was the reality he faced, day after day, month after month, year after year. What nobody understood at the time was that these rejections were doing something unexpected. They weren't weakening him, they were preparing him. Because soon, Ed Sheeran would reach a moment where waiting for approval would no longer be an option. And when that moment arrived, he would make a decision that changed the trajectory of his life forever. There comes a moment in some people's lives when a difficult truth becomes impossible to ignore. No opportunity is on its way. No miracle is around the corner. No powerful person is secretly preparing to change everything. For Ed Sheeran, that realization did not arrive in a dramatic flash. It emerged gradually, through years of waiting for things that never happened. The music industry had made its position clear. If he sat around hoping to be discovered, he could be waiting forever. This was a dangerous crossroads. Because many talented people spend years believing their breakthrough is being delayed by circumstances. They convince themselves that success is simply a matter of being noticed. If the right producer hears the song, if the right manager makes a call, if the right executive takes a chance, the logic sounds reasonable, but it places control in someone else's hands. And Ed was beginning to understand just how powerless that made him. At an age when most people seek stability, he made a choice that looked reckless from the outside. Instead of waiting for permission, he decided to create momentum himself. This wasn't a glamorous decision. There were no headlines announcing it, no industry insiders applauding his courage. In fact, most people never noticed it at all, but this may have been the most important turning point of his entire journey. Because from that moment forward, his focus shifted away from being chosen. He became focused on becoming impossible to ignore. The difference sounds subtle. In reality, it changes everything. People who wait to be chosen often spend their energy chasing approval. People who become impossible to ignore spend their energy creating value. Ed started approaching his career differently. Every performance became an opportunity. Every audience mattered. Every connection mattered. Every song mattered, even when only a handful of people were listening. Especially when only a handful of people were listening. Most aspiring artists perform as if success begins when large crowds arrive. Ed began acting as if success was being built long before that happened. This mindset gave him an advantage few people recognized. While others saw small opportunities as insignificant, he treated them like training grounds. A nearly empty venue wasn't a disappointment. It was practice. An audience of 10 wasn't discouraging. It was experience. A difficult performance wasn't a setback. It was education. Over time, this approach created something powerful. Momentum. Not the kind that appears in headlines, the invisible kind. The kind that accumulates quietly while nobody is paying attention. Skill improves. Confidence grows. Relationships expand. Opportunities multiply. And suddenly, years later, outsiders look at the result and call it overnight success. What they never see are the thousands of invisible actions that came first. But there was another reason this period mattered. Ed was learning a lesson that would define the rest of his career. The world rarely rewards potential. It rewards proof. Nobody cared about what he might become. People cared about what he could demonstrate right now. So instead of talking about his dream, he started building evidence for it, song by song, performance by performance, day by day. And that decision was about to lead him into one of the most demanding chapters of his life. A chapter where persistence would no longer be a personality trait. It would become a survival strategy. When people look back at Ed Sheeran's rise, they often search for the breakthrough moment. The one song, the one performance, the one lucky opportunity that changed everything. It's an appealing story because it simplifies success. It suggests that somewhere along the journey, a single event transformed an unknown musician into a future star. But that's not what happened. What actually separated Ed from thousands of other aspiring artists was something far less dramatic. He developed a strategy that was almost invisible to everyone around him. While many musicians were focused on being discovered, Ed became obsessed with increasing his surface area of opportunity. In simple terms, he stopped asking, "How do I get my big break?" and started asking, "How do I create more chances for something good to happen?" The difference was enormous. Most people treat opportunities like rare events. Ed treated them like numbers. If one performance didn't change his life, maybe 100 would. If one song didn't gain attention, maybe 50 would. If one connection didn't lead anywhere, perhaps the next 10 might. This way of thinking removed something that destroys countless dreams: emotional dependence on immediate results. Every time an artist pours all their hope into a single moment, disappointment becomes devastating. But when success is built through volume and repetition, individual failures lose much of their power. And that's exactly what Ed was doing. He wasn't betting everything on one song. He was writing constantly. He wasn't waiting for one audience. He was performing everywhere. He wasn't chasing one influential person. He was building relationships wherever he could. From the outside, these actions looked ordinary. From the inside, they were creating a system designed to make progress inevitable. This approach also revealed something unusual about his personality. Many people are willing to work hard when results are visible. Far fewer are willing to work hard when results remain hidden. For long stretches of time, there was little evidence that his strategy was working. No massive fan base, no record deal, no public validation, just effort. Relentless effort. The kind of effort that becomes difficult because nobody is applauding it. Imagine performing night after night without knowing whether any of it will matter. Imagine writing song after song without knowing if anyone will ever hear them. Imagine sacrificing comfort, stability, and certainty while receiving almost no confirmation that you're moving in the right direction. Most people eventually need reassurance. Ed learned to operate without it, and that may have been one of his greatest advantages, because the absence of immediate rewards causes many talented individuals to stop, not because they fail, because they become exhausted by uncertainty. Ed, however, was developing a tolerance for uncertainty that would later become a superpower. He learned to trust the process before the results existed, to continue building before the evidence appeared, to keep moving when logic suggested slowing down. What nobody realized at the time was that this invisible strategy was producing something more valuable than attention. It was producing resilience, the kind of resilience that would soon be tested in ways few people could imagine. Because while Ed was creating opportunities, another challenge was emerging. A challenge that would force him to make sacrifices most people would never accept. And those sacrifices would take him far from comfort, far from stability, and deeper into the unknown than ever before. Most success stories are told from the finish line. People see the sold-out arenas, the chart-topping songs, the wealth, the recognition. They see the destination and assume the journey must have been difficult. What they rarely understand is what difficulty actually looks like when you're living through it. For Ed Sheeran, there was a period when pursuing his dream meant giving up almost every form of comfort that people take for granted. This wasn't the romantic version of struggle that appears in movies. It was uncertainty in its rawest form. After leaving the safety of his hometown and moving deeper into the music scene, Ed found himself living a reality that many aspiring artists know all too well. Money was scarce. Stability was almost non-existent. Every week carried new questions with no clear answers. Where would he perform next? How would he afford the journey? Where would he sleep? At times, the answer to that last question depended entirely on the kindness of other people. Friends, acquaintances, people willing to offer a couch, a spare room, or simply a place to stay for a night or two. From the outside, it may sound adventurous. In reality, it was exhausting, because temporary shelter comes with temporary certainty. You are always aware that your situation could change tomorrow, always aware that you're one unexpected problem away from having nowhere to go. Yet despite these conditions, Ed kept moving. Not because the situation was easy, because stopping felt even more dangerous. There is a psychological shift that happens when someone commits fully to a goal. Eventually, retreat becomes harder than persistence. Returning to a safer path would have required him to abandon years of effort, years of sacrifice, and years of belief. So instead, he continued forward. Performance after performance, city after city, train after train. What makes this chapter remarkable is not the hardship itself. Many people experience hardship. What makes it remarkable is how he used that hardship. Most individuals under pressure become increasingly focused on survival. Ed remained focused on growth. While struggling financially, he continued writing. While moving from place to place, he continued performing. While dealing with uncertainty, he continued improving his craft. He refused to treat difficult circumstances as a reason to pause development. And that decision created an advantage that was invisible at the time. Every show sharpened his stage presence. Every audience taught him something new. Every difficult situation increased his adaptability. Without realizing it, he was building skills that could never be learned in a classroom or purchased with money. The instability itself was becoming part of his education. There was another effect as well. Living this way stripped away illusions. It forced him to answer a question that every ambitious person eventually faces. Do you truly want this? Not when it's exciting, not when people are applauding, not when success seems close, Do you still want it when the rewards are absent? When the future is unclear, when the sacrifices become real? For Ed, the answer appeared to be yes, again and again, even when common sense suggested choosing an easier path. And it was during this demanding period that he began noticing something unexpected. The very qualities that made him different from other artists, the qualities he once saw as weaknesses, might actually become his greatest strengths. That realization would change the way he approached his career forever. For years, Ed Sheeran lived with a quiet assumption. If he wanted to succeed, he would need to become more like everyone else. It seemed logical. The music industry had a formula. Certain artists looked the part. Certain personalities attracted attention. Certain styles generated excitement. And if you were trying to break into that world, adapting to those expectations felt like the safest strategy. But there was a problem. No matter how hard Ed tried, he could never completely fit the mold. He wasn't the stereotypical pop idol. He wasn't built around flashy performances, carefully manufactured image campaigns, or larger-than-life celebrity personas. And perhaps most importantly, he wasn't pretending to be someone else. At first, this felt like a disadvantage. Every industry has unwritten rules, signals that tell people who belongs and who doesn't. Ed often found himself on the wrong side of those signals. The conventional wisdom suggested that standing out required becoming more polished, more marketable, more aligned with existing expectations. But something unexpected began happening. The very things that seemed to make him less appealing to gatekeepers started making him more appealing to audiences, because audiences weren't connecting with perfection. They were connecting with authenticity. People listened to his music and heard something that felt real, not manufactured, not calculated, not designed by committee, real. His songs carried vulnerability, awkwardness, heartbreak, hope, confusion. The emotions weren't hidden behind a carefully constructed image. They were exposed. And in an industry where many artists were trying to appear larger than life, Ed was doing something different. He was allowing himself to appear human. This distinction became increasingly important. The music world was filled with talented performers, but genuine relatability was far rarer. Listeners saw pieces of themselves in his stories, the insecurities, the mistakes, the uncertainty, the longing to be accepted. Instead of creating distance between himself and his audience, he reduced it, and that connection proved incredibly powerful. What's fascinating is that this transformation wasn't really about changing who he was. It was about changing how he viewed who he was. The characteristics he once believed needed fixing became assets. His appearance became recognizable. His honesty became memorable. His individuality became a brand. This is where many people misunderstand success. They assume successful individuals discover hidden strengths. More often, they stop hiding the strengths they already possess. Ed wasn't becoming someone new. He was becoming more comfortable being himself. And that shift affected everything. His music gained greater emotional depth. His performances felt more natural. His audience grew more loyal. People weren't just supporting songs anymore. They were supporting a person they believed was genuine. Meanwhile, something else was happening behind the scenes. The years of persistence were beginning to compound. The endless performances, the constant writing, the relentless repetition. Small gains that once seemed insignificant were starting to accumulate. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to create a subtle change in momentum. For the first time in years, there were signs that the struggle might be leading somewhere. Tiny signals, easy to miss, yet powerful enough to suggest that the impossible dream was becoming slightly less impossible. What Ed didn't know was that he was approaching a phase where persistence alone would no longer define the story. Now the sheer scale of his effort was about to become the defining factor. And the numbers behind that effort were almost unbelievable. When people hear that Ed Sheeran became successful through hard work, they often imagine the usual things: long hours, dedication, practice. The kind of effort that sounds impressive but remains difficult to visualize. The reality was far more extreme, because there was a period when Ed's life became a relentless cycle of performances that most people would never have been willing to endure. Not because the shows were glamorous, Because they weren't. Many aspiring musicians dream about playing in front of thousands. Ed spent years playing for dozens, sometimes fewer. Crowds so small that every face was visible. Rooms where conversations were louder than the music. Venues where audience members barely noticed he was there. For many performers, experiences like these become discouraging. They begin asking themselves a painful question: what's the point? What's the point of traveling for hours to play for a handful of strangers? What's the point of carrying equipment through cities when almost nobody knows your name? What's the point of giving everything on stage when the audience might forget you minutes later? These questions destroy more dreams than failure itself, because they attack meaning. And once people stop finding meaning in their effort, persistence becomes almost impossible. Yet Ed approached these situations differently. He wasn't measuring success by the size of the crowd. He was measuring success by the number of repetitions. Every performance represented another opportunity to improve, another opportunity to learn, another opportunity to test material, another opportunity to become better than he had been the day before. This perspective completely changed the value of small audiences. A room with 20 people was no longer a disappointment. It was a laboratory, a chance to observe what connected, which lyrics resonated, which moments created emotion, which stories captured attention. Night after night, he gathered information that most artists never collect because they quit before accumulating enough experience. The process was not exciting. That's what makes it remarkable. People admire discipline when they see the outcome. Very few appreciate what discipline actually feels like while it's happening. Often it feels repetitive, boring, invisible, unrewarded. Ed learned to operate within that reality. He developed a tolerance for repetition that gave him a significant advantage over competitors who relied on motivation. Motivation comes and goes. Repetition compounds. And over time, the gap becomes enormous. Think about it. If one musician performs occasionally while another performs relentlessly, the difference after a month might be small. After a year, it becomes noticeable. After several years, it becomes almost impossible to ignore. This was the hidden effect of Ed's schedule. Every show added another layer of confidence. Every audience sharpened his instincts. Every challenge improved his adaptability. Without realizing it, he was compressing years of learning into an unusually short period. The audiences may have been small. The lessons were not. And eventually, something interesting began to happen. The volume of work started producing visible results. Not fame, not yet, but evidence. People were returning to shows. Fans were bringing friends. Word was spreading, slowly, organically, without massive marketing campaigns or industry support. For the first time, momentum wasn't just something Ed could feel. It was something others could see. And soon that momentum would create the first real signs that the world might finally be starting to pay attention. The question was whether those early signals would be enough to change everything, or whether an entirely different breakthrough was waiting just around the corner. For a long time, Ed Sheeran's progress had been almost invisible. He was working harder, improving faster, performing more often. But from the outside, very little seemed different. This is one of the most frustrating phases of any ambitious journey. You invest enormous effort, yet the results appear disconnected from the work. Days become weeks, weeks become months, months become years, and the gap between action and reward feels endless. Most people assume persistence is difficult because of the workload. In reality, persistence is difficult because of delayed feedback. Human beings are wired to respond to evidence. We want proof that our sacrifices matter. We want confirmation that our direction is correct. For years, Ed had been operating with very little of either. Now, for the first time, small signs began appearing. Not dramatic signs, not life-changing signs, but enough to suggest that something was shifting beneath the surface. People were beginning to remember his name. More importantly, they were remembering his songs. The distinction mattered. A catchy performance can create temporary attention. A memorable song creates lasting attention. It gives people a reason to come back. And that was starting to happen. Individuals who had once encountered Ed by accident were now actively looking for his music. Fans who attended one show were showing up at another. Conversations were spreading through personal networks rather than advertisements. The growth was slow, but it carried a quality that many artists spend their entire careers chasing. It was genuine. No artificial hype, no manufactured controversy, no marketing machine forcing visibility. Just people sharing something they believed was worth sharing. These early signals created an important psychological shift. For years, Ed had been operating primarily on belief. Now he had evidence. Not enough evidence to guarantee success, but enough evidence to justify continuing. And sometimes, that's all a person needs. One small indication that the effort isn't disappearing into a void. One reason to keep moving. One sign that the future may be different from the past. Yet what made this phase dangerous was that success remained far away. Many people lose momentum when things begin improving. Strangely, the first signs of progress can become a trap. A little recognition creates comfort. Comfort reduces urgency. Urgency drives growth. Countless careers stall because individuals mistake early momentum for arrival. Ed didn't. Instead, he treated these encouraging developments as confirmation that he needed to work even harder. While others might have celebrated, he doubled down. More performances, more writing, more experimentation, more commitment. The goal wasn't to protect momentum, it was to accelerate it. This mindset revealed something important about his character. He wasn't simply trying to achieve success, he was trying to become capable of sustaining it. Those are very different objectives. Achieving success can happen through timing, luck, or a fortunate opportunity. Sustaining success requires preparation. And whether he realized it or not, Ed was preparing for a level of visibility far beyond anything he had experienced before. At the same time, another transformation was taking place. Something deeper than audience growth, something more powerful than recognition. He was learning how to turn his most vulnerable experiences into his greatest creative weapon, and that ability would soon separate him from nearly everyone around him. Most artists spend years trying to protect themselves. They hide their insecurities. They conceal their doubts. They carefully construct versions of themselves that appear stronger, cooler, or more confident than they really are. It makes sense. The world can be harsh. Exposure creates risk. Vulnerability invites judgment. But Ed Sheeran was discovering something that many people never realize. What makes us relatable is often the very thing we are most tempted to hide. By this point in his journey, he had accumulated experiences that could have easily become sources of embarrassment. The rejection, the uncertainty, the loneliness, the years of being underestimated, the countless moments when it seemed as though nobody was paying attention. Instead of burying those experiences, he began transforming them into music. And that decision changed everything. Because listeners were not merely hearing melodies, they were hearing fragments of real life. The awkward conversations, the heartbreak, the self-doubt, the longing, the mistakes, the emotions that people often experience privately, but rarely hear expressed honestly. This created a powerful connection. Most entertainment offers escape. Ed's music offered recognition. People listened and thought, "I felt that." Not, "I wish I were that person," but "I understand that feeling." That difference may seem subtle. In reality, it is enormous. Admiration creates distance. Recognition creates connection. And connection is what builds loyalty. As his audience grew, something fascinating began happening. Fans weren't just consuming songs, they were forming emotional relationships with the stories inside those songs. His music became a reflection of experiences that millions of people struggled to put into words themselves. The more honest he became, the stronger the connection grew. This contradicted much of the conventional wisdom surrounding success. Traditional thinking suggested that artists should appear larger than life. Ed was proving that appearing authentically human could be even more powerful. Of course, vulnerability comes with risks. When you reveal parts of yourself, criticism becomes more personal. Rejection feels sharper. Misunderstanding feels heavier. The walls that protect you become thinner. Yet vulnerability also creates trust. And trust is difficult to manufacture. Audiences can often sense when authenticity is real and when it is being performed. What they found in Ed was someone whose imperfections were not hidden behind the music. They were woven into it. That honesty became a competitive advantage that no marketing strategy could replicate. Because trends change, technology changes, markets change, human emotions do not. People still fall in love, still experience loss, still struggle with insecurity, still search for meaning. And Ed had learned how to translate those universal experiences into something listeners could feel. But even as his connection with audiences deepened, another force was beginning to reshape his future. For years, progress had been gradual, predictable, built through countless small steps. Now a chain reaction was about to begin. One opportunity would lead to another. One connection would create the next. One breakthrough would unlock several more. The momentum he had spent years building in silence was finally preparing to reveal its true power. And when it did, his life would never look the same again. For years, Ed Sheeran's career had moved forward through persistence. One performance at a time, one song at a time, one small opportunity at a time. Progress existed, but it was gradual, the kind of growth that is difficult to notice while it's happening. Then something changed, not because of a single lucky break, not because success suddenly appeared out of nowhere, but because the thousands of actions he had taken over the years began interacting with one another. And when that happened, momentum turned into acceleration. This is the phase of success that often confuses people. Observers see a rapid rise and assume it happened quickly. What they don't see is that every visible breakthrough is usually connected to countless invisible causes that came before it. Ed's journey was no different. The performances led to relationships. The relationships led to opportunities. The opportunities led to exposure. The exposure led to larger audiences, and larger audiences created even more opportunities. Each development strengthened the next, like a line of dominoes that had been carefully arranged over many years. Once the first pieces started falling, the process became increasingly difficult to stop. One person introduced him to another. One audience opened the door to a larger audience. One supporter helped create the next opportunity. Nothing happened in isolation. Everything was connected. This is one of the least understood aspects of achievement. People tend to focus on major events while ignoring the systems that make those events possible. Yet the system was exactly what Ed had spent years building. Without realizing it, he had created a network of experiences, skills, relationships, and credibility that now worked together in his favor. And unlike luck, those assets were cumulative. Every new opportunity became more valuable because of the opportunities that came before it. Every new fan increased the likelihood of attracting more fans. Every new success improved the chances of creating another success. The mathematics of growth had finally shifted. For years, effort had produced small returns. Now, small improvements were producing larger outcomes. The same actions suddenly carried greater impact. A song reached more people. A performance generated more attention. A recommendation traveled further. This is why success often appears sudden from the outside. The visible growth is real, but the invisible preparation is usually much larger. For Ed, this period was both exciting and dangerous. Exciting because the dream was becoming tangible. Dangerous because rapid progress can create new distractions. Expectations increase, pressure grows, the stakes become higher. Many individuals struggle during this transition because the environment changes faster than they do. The skills that help them survive obscurity are not always the same skills required to handle visibility. But years of hardship had given Ed something valuable: perspective. He knew what it felt like to perform for almost nobody. He knew what it felt like to sleep on couches. He knew what it felt like to face rejection after rejection. Those experiences created a foundation that success could not easily shake. Yet even as opportunities multiplied, a deeper question was beginning to emerge. Why were audiences connecting with him so strongly? Why was his growth continuing while so many equally talented musicians remained stuck? The answer had less to do with talent than most people imagined, and everything to do with a quality that cannot be measured by charts, awards, or sales figures. A quality that would soon become one of the defining reasons behind his global rise. One of the biggest myths about success is that the most talented person eventually wins. It's a comforting idea. It suggests that ability alone determines outcomes, that if someone possesses enough natural gifts, the world will eventually recognize them. But the music industry tells a very different story. Every year, countless talented artists disappear, not because they lack skill, not because they lack creativity, not because they lack potential. They disappear because talent and endurance are not the same thing. And if there was one lesson Ed Sheeran's journey had been teaching all along, it was this: talent may open a door. Resilience keeps you walking when the hallway seems endless. By this stage, Ed had already spent years proving something unusual. He wasn't simply willing to work hard. He was willing to keep working when the results failed to arrive on schedule. That distinction separated him from a remarkable number of competitors. Think about how many moments could have ended his story. The ignored opportunities, the financial uncertainty, the industry rejection, the tiny audiences, the self-doubt. None of these obstacles were fatal on their own. What makes them dangerous is accumulation. One setback can be motivating. 100 setbacks can become unbearable. Most people don't quit because of a single failure. They quit because repeated disappointment slowly erodes belief. And belief is often the first casualty of a difficult journey. What made Ed different was not an absence of doubt. He experienced doubt, like everyone does. The difference was his relationship with doubt. He didn't interpret uncertainty as a reason to stop. He treated it as part of the process. This mindset allowed him to continue operating during periods when many others would have withdrawn. While competitors were waiting for confidence, he was taking action. While others were searching for guarantees, he was creating experience. While others were evaluating whether the effort was worth it, he was already doing the work. That pattern repeated itself again and again. Over time, the effect became impossible to ignore. Resilience creates a strange advantage. Its benefits are not immediately visible. You don't wake up one day and suddenly see the rewards of persistence. Instead, resilience quietly extends your timeline. It allows you to remain in the game longer than expected, and often, that alone changes the outcome. Because opportunities cannot benefit people who have already left. Many careers end just before momentum arrives. Many dreams collapse just before conditions improve. Many talented individuals stop one chapter too early. Ed didn't know exactly when his breakthrough would come, but he made sure he was still present when the opportunity appeared. That may sound simple. It isn't. Remaining committed while facing uncertainty is one of the rarest abilities in any field. And the longer his journey continued, the more valuable that ability became. By now, audiences were recognizing his music. Opportunities were expanding. His reputation was growing. Yet another transformation was taking place. People were no longer connecting solely with the songs. They were connecting with the person behind them. Without consciously planning it, Ed was building something much bigger than a music career. He was building trust. And that trust would soon become one of the most powerful assets in his rise from struggling musician to global phenomenon. As Ed Sheeran's audience continued to grow, something unusual became increasingly clear. People weren't following him for the reasons the music industry had traditionally expected. They weren't captivated by a carefully engineered image. They weren't obsessed with mystery, glamour, or celebrity status. In many ways, Ed seemed to be breaking rules that had governed popular culture for decades, and yet somehow, the more he ignored those rules, the stronger his connection with audiences became. For years, the entertainment world had operated on a familiar formula. Stars were supposed to feel larger than life, untouchable, extraordinary. They existed on a different level from ordinary people. Distance created fascination. Exclusivity created demand. Mystique created value. But Ed's rise was following a completely different path. Instead of creating distance, he reduced it. Instead of appearing unreachable, he appeared familiar. Instead of building a character, he revealed a person. This distinction mattered far more than anyone realized, because audiences were changing. People had become increasingly skeptical of perfection. Polished images no longer carried the same power they once did. The public had begun searching for something different, something authentic, something they could trust. And trust is difficult to fake. Every interview, every performance, every interaction reinforced a simple message. What people saw was largely what they got. That consistency became one of his greatest strengths, not because he was flawless, because he wasn't, because audiences could sense that he wasn't trying to convince them otherwise. Ironically, the imperfections that once seemed like obstacles were becoming assets. The awkwardness, the honesty, the humility, the absence of a manufactured persona. These qualities made him memorable in a landscape crowded with carefully constructed identities. And as his visibility expanded, this authenticity created a powerful feedback loop. The more successful he became, the more people expected him to change. When he didn't, trust deepened. When trust deepened, loyalty increased. When loyalty increased, audiences became emotionally invested, not just in the music, in the journey itself. This is the moment when a career begins transforming into something larger. Fans no longer support individual songs, they support the person creating them. And that kind of relationship is extraordinarily valuable, because songs rise and fall, trends come and go, but trust endures. By now, Ed was no longer fighting for recognition. Recognition had arrived. His challenge was different. He had to navigate growth without losing the qualities that created that growth in the first place. A surprising number of successful people struggle with this transition. The very success they worked so hard to achieve begins changing the environment around them. Expectations grow, schedules become overwhelming, public attention intensifies. The pressure to evolve becomes relentless. Yet Ed's greatest advantage remained unchanged. He never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked. And because he remembered those years, he understood something many celebrities never learn. Fame can attract attention, but authenticity keeps it. Soon, the world would witness just how powerful that authenticity had become, because the recognition he had spent years earning was about to explode onto a scale that few artists ever experience. The stages would become larger, the audiences would become global, the records would begin falling, and the young musician who once struggled to be noticed would find himself standing at the center of worldwide attention. For most of his journey, Ed Sheeran had been chasing visibility. Now, visibility was chasing him. The transformation was extraordinary. The same artist who had spent years performing in front of tiny audiences was suddenly appearing on some of the biggest stages in the world. The same musician who had once struggled to get people to notice his work was now reaching millions. And perhaps the strangest part of all was how sudden it seemed. To the public, it looked as though Ed had appeared almost overnight. One day he was relatively unknown. The next, his music seemed to be everywhere. Radio stations, streaming platforms, television appearances, international tours, award ceremonies. The visibility was impossible to ignore. But as we now know, nothing about this success was truly sudden. The world was witnessing the harvest. It had missed the years of planting. What made this period remarkable wasn't simply the scale of his growth. It was the speed at which momentum began multiplying. Every successful release expanded his audience. Every new audience created additional opportunities. Every opportunity amplified the next. The cycle became self-reinforcing. His songs crossed borders, then crossed generations, then crossed cultural barriers. People from completely different backgrounds were finding pieces of themselves inside his music. That universal appeal became one of the defining characteristics of his career. Many artists become popular. Far fewer become globally relatable. Ed had somehow achieved both. Listeners in different countries, speaking different languages, living entirely different lives, could still connect with the emotions at the heart of his songs. Love, loss, hope, regret, longing. These experiences required no translation. And because they required no translation, his audience continued expanding. Soon the numbers themselves became historic. Record-breaking tours, massive streaming milestones, chart achievements that placed him among the most successful artists of his generation. The accomplishments were impressive, but numbers alone failed to explain what was happening. Because success at that level is never just about statistics. it's about cultural impact. His music became part of people's lives, part of their memories, part of weddings, road trips, celebrations, heartbreaks, and milestones. Millions of listeners associated moments of their own lives with songs he had written. That kind of connection cannot be measured by awards. It exists on a much deeper level. And yet, as extraordinary as this chapter appeared from the outside, it introduced a new challenge, one that many people never consider. The world often assumes that success eliminates problems, that recognition removes uncertainty, that achieving your dream creates permanent fulfillment. Reality is rarely that simple. Every level of success creates a new environment, new expectations, new responsibilities, new pressures. And while the world celebrated Ed's achievements, very few people understood what was happening behind the scenes, because hidden beneath the headlines and accomplishments was a reality that almost every global star eventually faces. The greater the success, the greater the weight that comes with it. And soon Ed would discover that reaching the top of the mountain and staying there are two very different challenges. From a distance, success often looks like the end of the story. The dream has been achieved, the obstacles have been conquered, the rewards have arrived. What more could there be? But for many people who reach extraordinary heights, success is not the conclusion. It is the beginning of an entirely new set of challenges. By the time Ed Sheeran became a global superstar, he had accomplished what millions only imagine. He had the recognition, the influence, the financial security, and the creative freedom that most artists spend their entire lives pursuing. Yet success introduced pressures that did not exist during the years of obscurity. When nobody knows who you are, mistakes remain private. When millions know who you are, mistakes become headlines. When your audience is small, expectations are manageable. When your audience spans the world, expectations become relentless. This is one of the great paradoxes of achievement. The things that make success attractive are often the same things that make it difficult to sustain. Visibility creates opportunity. It also creates scrutiny. Influence creates freedom. It also creates responsibility. Recognition creates admiration. It also creates pressure. For Ed, life no longer resembled the uncertain days of sleeping on couches and performing for tiny crowds. But uncertainty had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. Instead of wondering whether anyone would listen, there was the challenge of remaining creatively inspired. Instead of fighting for attention, there was the challenge of handling constant attention. Instead of trying to build a career, there was the challenge of protecting one. These are problems many people dream of having. That doesn't make them easy, because human psychology does not automatically adapt to extraordinary circumstances. The same person who once struggled with rejection now had to navigate global fame. The same individual who once sought recognition now had to learn how to live with it. And fame can be deceptive. The public often sees only the highlights, the sold-out tours, the awards, the accomplishments. What remains invisible are the sacrifices that continue long after success arrives. Privacy becomes limited. Normal routines become difficult. Personal mistakes become public discussions. Every decision attracts attention. Every absence invites speculation. Every action is interpreted by millions of people who know the public figure but not the private person. This reality forces many successful individuals to confront a difficult question. How do you remain yourself when the world constantly projects expectations onto you? For Ed, authenticity once again became a crucial anchor. The qualities that helped him survive rejection also helped him survive success. Humility, perspective, connection to the people and experiences that existed before fame. Because fame changes circumstances, it does not automatically change identity. And perhaps that is why his story continued resonating with so many people. Despite the scale of his success, the foundation remained familiar. The same determination, the same honesty, the same willingness to keep growing. Yet when we step back and look at the entire journey, a larger truth begins to emerge. The records matter, the awards matter, the achievements matter. But none of those things explain why this story continues inspiring millions around the world. The real lesson lies somewhere deeper. A lesson that began long before the fame and continues long after it. And it is that lesson that brings us to the final chapter of this extraordinary journey. If we remove the fame, the records, the sold-out stadiums, and the global recognition, what remains of Ed Sheeran's story? At first glance, that may seem like a strange question. After all, those achievements are what made him famous. They are the visible proof of success. But they are not the most important part of the story. Because millions of people dream of success. Very few understand what success actually demands. When we look back at Ed's journey, one pattern appears again and again. Not talent, not luck, not timing, persistence, but not the simplistic version of persistence that people often talk about. Not blind optimism, not motivational slogans, not the belief that everything will somehow work out. His persistence was different. It was practical, deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes exhausting, often invisible. He kept moving forward during periods when there was almost no evidence that his efforts would be rewarded, and that may be the most valuable lesson of all. Most people are willing to work hard when success feels close. Few are willing to work hard when success feels distant. Most people can tolerate uncertainty for a week. Some can tolerate it for a month. Very few can tolerate it for years. Yet that is exactly what Ed did. He continued creating when nobody was paying attention. He continued improving when recognition was absent. He continued building when results remained hidden. Again and again, he chose action over certainty. And over time, those choices accumulated. That accumulation is what changed his life. Not one decision, thousands, not one opportunity, hundreds, not one breakthrough. Years of preparation that eventually made breakthroughs possible. Perhaps that is why his story resonates so deeply. Because beneath the music, beneath the fame and beneath the celebrity status, lies a truth that applies far beyond the entertainment industry. Every meaningful achievement begins as an invisible process. Before the world sees results, someone is making sacrifices. Before recognition arrives, someone is practicing. Before momentum becomes obvious, someone is enduring doubt. The public sees outcomes. Life happens in the process. Ed Sheeran's story reminds us that success is rarely a sudden event. It is usually a delayed response. A delayed response to discipline. A delayed response to consistency. A delayed response to showing up long after excitement has disappeared. The young boy who was told he didn't fit the mold never became successful by proving everyone wrong in a single moment. He became successful by refusing to let other people's opinions define the limits of his future. And perhaps that is the most powerful part of this entire journey. The world did not change its mind about Ed Sheeran overnight. He changed his future long before the world noticed, long before the stadiums, long before the records, long before the applause. He simply kept moving. And eventually, the distance between who he was and who he could become disappeared. Not because the road was easy, not because the odds were favorable, but because he stayed on the road long enough to reach a destination that most people abandon long before they ever see. That is the true story of Ed Sheeran. Not a story about fame, a story about endurance, and sometimes endurance is the rarest talent of all.